Thank you, and hello everyone. I'd like to begin by telling you about the organization we established 25 years ago, the Electronic Privacy Information Center. At that time, there was a big debate in the United States and elsewhere about the freedom to use encryption technology. And we said then that it was vitally important that internet users and businesses and government agencies have the freedom to use encryption to ensure that their personal data would be protected. Although the debate still continues, I think 25 years later we can all agree that encryption is vital to the security of the internet. But we also realized, as we thought about the relationship between technology and privacy, that there would be many new challenges, and that each of these challenges required investigation, understanding, and response. And so you see here on our word cloud many of the issues that EPIC today is focused on. Some of you may have heard about the new European Union privacy law, which is called the General Data Protection Regulation. That's a very important development in the privacy world. But more broadly, we're concerned about surveillance. We're concerned about data breach, privacy impact assessments, and even the personal data that's collected about students. How is that information is used? Who has access to it? And are the protections sufficient? So it's a broad range of issues that we look at EPIC, but we do so also with a philosophy. Our philosophy is that when you confront a problem, you need to find a solution. And so just a few years ago, I brought together leading experts in technology and law and public policy and privacy, and I said to them, please write a short essay. Look at a new challenge in the field of technology, and then propose a solution. And we put all these essays together in a book, which is called Privacy in the Modern Age, The Search for Solutions. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. How do we find solutions to these new challenges? But there's something going on now, which is actually very different from how we understood the internet 25 years ago. When we talked about privacy, we worried about surveillance, and we worried about the government listening in on our private communications, or big companies making use of our personal data. Those challenges still remain, to be sure. But as the internet has become connected to devices in the physical world, to televisions and thermostats and dolls and cars, drones, a whole new set of issues has emerged. And so I'd like to begin by talking with you today about the challenges of the Internet of Things, what we also call always-on devices. Now, as I explained a moment ago, EPIC is very much committed to finding solutions, policy solutions, technical solutions, legal solutions to some of these new challenges. And so a few of my slides this afternoon will summarize some of the activities that we've undertaken in the United States in response to these challenges. This slide is from 2015. We wrote to the US Federal Trade Commission and to the Department of Justice, and we urged them to conduct a workshop on always-on consumer devices. We talked about how these internet-connected devices were beginning to be found in everyone's home. And of course, they provide tremendous service, but they also raise new challenges. Those same devices that allow you to order more from Amazon also record what you're saying. They may even record what people within the home are saying to one another. So we urge these US agencies to conduct a comprehensive investigation to understand the risks. Now let me tell you a little bit about what's happened over the last few years. This is a very interesting device. I own one, by the way. I need to explain at the beginning, I'm not a privacy survivalist. I don't live underground with a big bag of rice and a big container of water. I actually believe that the reason for privacy protection is so that we can enjoy new technology and we not find ourselves boycotting everything that comes along. But to enjoy new technology means taking seriously the obligation to ensure strong privacy protection. So this is a wonderful TV with lots of features, but it also turns out to record private communications in the home. And here's the interesting part. That feature can be remotely activated. So even if you say, well, that's fine, I like the TV, but I don't want to be talking to the TV, I should be watching the TV should not be watching me. I respect that, by the way. It turns out that with a Samsung TV, people outside of your home can remotely enable the recording and capture the communications that are taking place. You might want to think about that this week when Apple announces its new home recording device. Some of you may remember that movie, 2001. This image reminded me a little bit of that computer that told Dave, don't try to disconnect me. I wouldn't do that, Dave, it said. You know the movie. I don't know why Apple picked that image. I think that was a mistake. Bad marketing, maybe. But of course, the issues also get serious. We actually had a criminal case in the United States where the police were seeking evidence from Amazon because a communication within the home that may have been relevant to a criminal investigation had been recorded by one of their devices. And the police said to Amazon, we need that information from you. And some people, given this headline, police demand data from Amazon device in murder case, may think, well, that's maybe appropriate. I mean, in some circumstances, of course, companies should help with the police investigations. But I don't think there's a setting on Alexa that says, turn over communications only in the case of a murder investigation. Right? What if you're talking in your home and expressing some concerns, and now I'm speaking hypothetically, of course, about the President of the United States? Is this information you would want Amazon to turn over to the government? I don't think so. So until they have a setting that says only turn over the data for really important cases and never for political reasons, I think we're going to leave Alexa in the box. We were involved in a campaign in the last few years concerning children's toys that are connected to the internet. And these are devices that are actually trained by interacting with your child how to respond in ways that develop bonds of affection. Now, call me a little old-fashioned. I thought that's what parents were supposed to do. But now, apparently, there are toys that are able to do this. With credit, I would say, to the Norwegian Consumer Council, a group of privacy advocates at an NGO, we actually did launch a formal boycott. And we had privacy organizations in Europe, and we had privacy organizations in North America. And we wrote to this company and we said, this doll, Kayla, is actually a real problem. It's not so much a toy, it's actually a spy device. And it has the ability to record and listen in on children's communications. Is that really innovation? Is that really something that supports childhood development? I don't think so. And the company actually stopped selling the doll. So we thought that was a good development. I said at the beginning, I don't generally believe in boycotts. Occasionally we make an exception. And we did for Kayla. But these are the kinds of issues you need to be aware of. There was a session earlier today about smart watches that provide location tracking information. Now, of course, that can be very useful to a smart user who understands how that data is being collected and how it can be used. But with many of these technologies, you have to ask yourself, is someone on the other side of the mirror looking back at me when I use that device? In other words, is the location data on my smartwatch simply accessible to me as the user, or is it also available to the company and the company's business partners that have provided the service? That's where the problems begin. And there was a very interesting story this past week. Some of you may have heard about a Fitbit-like device to help people, get more energetic, which I guess is a good thing. Apparently, the US military had issued these devices to people in the army who were stationed in the Middle East and in Africa and elsewhere. And the company actually provides on the internet what's called a heat map to show where all their users are. And so you see lots and lots of people in New York City running around Central Park, or maybe those are people driving, trying to find a parking space. I mean, it's a real problem, by the way, in New York City. I guess it is here too, but okay. But the heat map also revealed the location of US bases in Africa and the Middle East, which was actually quite an interesting problem. And the company had to explain how they had made this setting, and someone who bought this big batch of smart watches probably got into a bit of trouble. But there you have it, right? New devices providing information to the user, that's very helpful. How many miles did I run today? But also providing information to others. Where is this military base located? That raises some difficult issues. That's the always-on device. Let's talk a little bit about connected vehicles. It's a fascinating technology. I think maybe you've had some discussion already at the conference. Many countries, particularly looking at advances in IT, are trying to incorporate some of the new technologies for connected cars. Some describe it as autonomous driving. And there's a very interesting and important debate about whether connected vehicles could actually lower the risk of highway fatalities. In other words, promote public safety and public welfare, which would be a good outcome, of course. But the problems are very complex. To be sure, to get a heavy metal object moving around a busy physical space with lots of people moving back and forth is not a programming assignment for a first-year student, right? It's a hard problem. And so we have recently warned the United States Senate, as it looks at the issue of connected cars, to think very carefully about some of the risk about the deployment of this new technology. We found, for example, hackers are able to break in to the remote control of a connected vehicle. And this is actually to my point earlier. In the old days, we might have said, well, that's a privacy problem, right? I mean, if there's communications or texting or email, a hacker is able to intercept a communication. But you see, with a device that's connected to the internet in the physical world, it's a different problem. It's a physical safety problem. Because you see, now what the hacker is doing is not surveillance. Now what the hacker is doing is actually controlling the vehicle, pushing the brakes, pushing the accelerator, changing the orientation of the steering wheel. And these are real problems. We've made numerous suggestions to US safety agencies. Let's see, here's our letter to the Senate. This is very timely. This was just a week ago. We wrote to the Senate committee. They were holding a hearing on driving automotive innovation and federal policies. The witnesses asked to testify represent only auto companies and private research firms. So EPIC is providing these comments for the hearing record to help ensure that a consumer protection perspective is present in the committee's consideration of these important issues. Now, in fairness, we have no objection to the auto companies and the researchers and the technologists making their recommendations as to how to incorporate IT and how to make better use of the highway system. Innovation is a good thing, and it's not at odds with privacy protection or consumer protection. But we do believe that in that conversation, there should be a privacy expert and there should be a consumer expert present in the discussion so that all views are represented. And these are also our detailed and very boring comments, I'm afraid, to our Highway and Safety Administration. But all of this work is necessary because the impact of the deployment of connected vehicles will be quite substantial. I'm a lawyer. Okay, I live in Washington. It's almost a residency requirement. They kind of ask you when you drive into the city, can I see your lawyer credentials, please? Like, oh, I forgot them. But I did this brief for our Supreme Court just a couple months ago. And the case actually concerns rental vehicles and whether the police can search a rental vehicle when the person who's driving the car is not the person who actually rented the car. So it's an interesting problem in criminal law. But we decided, bad joke coming, not to go down that road. We took the opportunity instead to talk about how the technology of motor vehicles is changing very rapidly, how there's a lot more personal information being stored in cars. You probably have had the experience when you rent a car and you sync your phone with Bluetooth and it downloads your contact list and suddenly your car knows everybody you know. That's a little strange, right? But the key point, and this is the point we made to the Supreme Court, is that in the future, the car actually won't care who's on the rental agreement or who's not on the rental agreement. The car will simply be in possession of a lot of information about everyone in the vehicle. And that's the issue we wanted the court to start to think about as they were looking at this case. Okay, let's say a few words about drones. Drones just kind of look scary. I mean, all I had to do was find a good picture or two. One of the key features of a drone, of course, is that it has a camera. And when we began to think about the consequences of deploying drones in the United States, we made the argument that there really should be some privacy rules in place. I mean, particularly because it's so easy with a drone to fly onto a person's property or maybe to follow someone down the street. And we asked our aviation administration to establish privacy rules for drones so that when the drones were being used, particularly for commercial purposes, they weren't also conducting surveillance. And the FAA was reluctant to do this, partly because the business groups didn't want the additional regulation and they didn't think privacy was a big deal. So we do what good lawyers do in Washington, which is we just sued them. And we said, you know, you really have an obligation to the public to protect privacy. We're not against the use of drones. Admission, we have one at Epic. But we think there should be privacy rules to protect the public. And one of the other points that came up in the course of our work on drones is that isn't it odd that these devices that fly in physical space around us are able to observe us and identify us, maybe from our phone or maybe from our facial recognition, but we have almost no ability to know who the owner or the operator of the drone is. And that there seems to be an asymmetry that's a real problem, and actually a problem that could get worse. Because if we're in a world where all of these internet-connected devices know who we are, but we don't know who they are, who's going to win, right? The FAA actually agreed with us on this. And in response to our recommendation that there be mandatory identification requirements for drones, they issued a ruling late last year that was picked up on, well, this is a legal report. We'll talk about Asimovs' laws of robotics to require the mandatory identification of drones. Okay, so there was a victory. I wanted to pull some of the key themes together in the talk today by referring to famous the laws of robotics. And since you all know about 2001, that movie. I think many of you may have heard of Asimovs' Laws of Robotics. He wrote this, I think, back in the early 1950s. And he was very interested in the challenges that would arise in a world that was populated both by people and machines. And for the designers of the machines, he said, we really need to construct ethical principles. We need to construct ethical principles so that we have machines that help people, but also ethical principles so that we don't end up with machines that hurt people. And I thought his principles were really good. So for those who haven't seen them before, here are the 3 laws of robotics. The first law is that a robot may not injure a human, okay? The second law is that a robot must obey the orders of a human, except it has to respect the first law. So a person can't tell a robot to go injure a human. You're following me, right? That's how the 2 laws interact. And there is, in the third point, a bit of self-preservation. A robot should protect itself, except it must respect the first 2 laws. And this is also why that scene in 2001 is so very prescient. Because you see, what the astronauts were trying to do in that movie was that they were trying to disable the robot that had taken control of the ship, taken control of them, and they were unable to do so. The answer is that the designer of that system had failed to build in Asimov's laws of robotics. Now, of course, if he did, the movie wouldn't have been as good, so maybe we're okay. But Dave is not okay, because I think he got left in the air chamber. All right, so I thought a lot about Asimov's laws of robotics, and as big a fan as I am, I thought we needed a version 2.0. I left in place the first 3 laws, which are perfectly fine, but I wanted to add 2 new laws. And these came about, as you will see now, partly in response to the work that EPIC was doing to try to promote greater accountability for new technology. So here are my new 2 laws. A robot must always reveal the basis of its decision. And I call that law algorithmic transparency. I really do want to know which factors a machine considered before it made a decision that impacted a person. Those constraints are important. If it's a device gathering data for climate, that's fine. It's not a privacy issue. I'm less concerned about algorithmic transparency. But if it's a machine that's making a decision about who in the airport to pull aside for closer investigation, or who at the bank gets the loan, or which student goes to the elevated teaching school, I think we have the right to know how those decisions are made. And I think the people who are making those decisions in an automated system should be able to defend them. What I don't think we want is a black box society where people say to us, well, it's too complicated, or I can't explain it, or we've invested a lot in all of this. I'm sorry, you're just not going to find out. If a decision is being made about a person, the basis of the decision should be known. My second law is that a robot must always reveal its actual identity. And this came about precisely because of the work we were doing to try to establish safeguards for drones. And our point was a very simple one. If we're going to exist in a world where these physical devices are around us, particularly devices with cameras looking at us and trying to identify us, we most certainly should have the right to identify them. Now, we've taken these laws and made them into political campaigns in the United States. In fact, if you stop by the booth for the Data Protection Agency here at the conference, you can pick up one of our screen cleaners, which says, open the code. And we decided to print that on a screen cleaner because we said, if you can't see the code, you can't fix the code. And you can also use it as a cocktail napkin if you prefer. We really don't care. Our other campaign slogans, I'm not even sure what Bayesian determinations are not justice means, but everybody told me it was really cool, so we went with it. And again about drones. The FAA advisory panel recommends the identification of drones. So I'm going to leave you with a final thought today, a bit based on our experience at EPIC and very much in support of your work in the IT field. I believe you can be a privacy advocate, you can be a consumer advocate, and you can support innovation and progress. I don't see a conflict between the two. I actually believe that over the next few years, some of the most innovative developments will take place in the areas of privacy protection and consumer protection. Because to develop new products and services that are sustainable and safe and can be used widely by consumers, almost most certainly need to be designed with privacy and consumer protection in mind. So that's the challenge ahead. And to come back to someone who's been influential for us and to update his famous saying, he was a little more gender specific, so I've changed his pronouns here. By the way, recent change in the Canadian national anthem, no longer gender specific. Go Canada. What a person creates with their hands, they should control with their head. I think it's excellent advice. Thank you all for listening. Congratulations and have a wonderful conference.